Good afternoon and welcome to our regular meeting of Health, Education, and Neighborhood Council Committee. Today is Tuesday, January 23rd at 1 p.m. and we are in City Hall, room 1010. I have Councilmember Gil Cedillo who has joined us, and we have quorum, so I'd like to call this meeting to order. And I want to remind anyone who wants to speak and who hasn't signed up to speak on any one of the items on the agenda, including public comment, to fill out a comment card and bring it up to the front. So at this point, if we could have order in the audience, please. At this point, we're going to open up the public comment, and I see we have somebody who signed up for every single comment card. Every single item plus general public comment. So if I could have Mr. Herman come on up, I'll give you 3 minutes, 1 minute general public comment, and 2 minutes for all the items. Thank you.
It's not an easy day today, but in item number 15/1380S9 in CD12, this deals with the Health Commission, and two names to mention is Dibble Dwarf Englander of the 12th District, 5th place loser, and that of Jew Boy Bloomfield. And they're asking for a what? Report on the status of healthy study updates mandate, a settlement agreement between South Coast Air. Well, you know what? Fuck your South Coast Air and fuck all your stupid fucking studies already. Shut the Aliso Canyon gas leak down. Shut it down now. The same way we shut down Chief Charlie Beck. And then we go to item number 5, aging report. No one fucking cares about the aging senior community service people. No one ever does. If you walk out anywhere in Los Angeles and you see the conditions of the elderly, the abused elderly by our fucked up Mayor Eric Garcetti, you learn and find out that the senior community is by far restricted to receive programs, services, and activities in an equal and unbiased and non-segregated way. Then we go into item 6, Pacific Region Older Adult Service. Now what the fuck is older adult service? I'm an adult. I asked for service, and not one dumb motherfucker politician steps up to help me. I've been homeless since 2008. Not one dumb motherfucking politician stepped up to help me. And I'm an older adult asking for services to minimize the multi-purpose for senior centers. But you know what? Fuck your services and fuck your adult services. Because the report proposed for the contract of St. Barnabas Senior Center, fuck them too. No one gives a fuck about senior adults. Now my general public comment. Now that we don't have Herman fuckhead Jason Weston Jr. here, he can't threaten me. Where the fuck is he at? As soon as I get away from the podium, he's going to pop up.
If you could refrain, if you
this
could
is general public comment. I'm talking about my health.
On the agenda, please.
I'm talking about my health. He threatened me the other day in a public meeting, so it interfered with my health because, see, the idea of Health, Education, and Neighborhoods Committee is to protect the welfare of a speaker, protect you under the Brown Act, protect you under the Bain Act from threats and coercing you to say what a fucked up politician wants you to say, lies. So as long as you're on a committee and you're part of the fucked up lies of Herman Jason Weston Jr., aka asshole, shithole, your health is deteriorating day by day, because as long as I don't get help and services, I'm going to come here every fucking day until I demand an action from you stupid motherfuckers.
Thank you, Mr. Herman. And we have a lot of new faces in the audience. Is this, can I show a raise of hands, first time you've been to a committee meeting or a council meeting? Oh, good. You know, I just want to thank you so much for coming down to your committee meeting and to City Hall. I just want to explain to you, you know, here at Los Angeles City Hall, we value First Amendment rights and we value your free speech. Mr. Herman, please, if you could refrain. That is your first and final warning. If you interrupt again, I'm going to ask you to leave. But we do value free speech. We do value all opinions, whether it's useful or not. But we allow for everyone to have equal time and equal access. So I just want to welcome everyone who's been here for the first time to a committee meeting, and just explain to you that, you know, this is part of your democracy, and this is part of the process, and as such, no matter how unproductive someone's comments might be, we allow them to express them. So, thank you for being here. I want to continue with public comment, and I think we have, Mark Masseri, I don't see him. Oh, there you are, Mark. We'll give you a minute for your public comment. I'll give you 2 for the items, okay? But we just want to finish up the public comment here.
Yeah. Commissioners, there's a breakdown in the NC process, and I think it falls to you or it falls to someone. I'm with the Los Feliz Neighborhood Council. In the last 6 months, I've spent more time dealing with conversations over the Brown Act than I have in 8 years. I don't think it's a coincidence that suddenly the financing program moved from the department to the city clerk, and now Dunn is completely focused on preventing Brown Act violations. It just seems coincidental to me. In any event, we were introduced to people called now NEAs that are supposed to ride shotgun on our meetings and tell us what we're doing right and wrong. They just showed up. They stopped our meeting. They decided that we had violated the Brown Act. Didn't explain exactly how we did it, but decided that we did. So what this person then did was spike one of our funding requests, because he could. What I want to know is, why did we not get any kind of information that said...
Continue. Finish your thought. Go ahead.
Why did we not get any? There's a policy, these new folks, these are the roles, these are the responsibilities. My question for you that you should ask is there a policy? When was it drafted? How is it circulated? What we have to remember is that for 15 years, we have been aggregating all sorts of constraints and strictures and rules that change and move, and downstream from these rules and downstream from the department and the office, City Attorney's Office of Neighborhood Advisement, there are 96 councils that change personnel every 2 years. This is no way to run a railroad. You really need to start to say, how are you guys going to get this together? And the answer is not more staff. The answer is, how are you going to do it? It's too long. We have gone, I'm sorry, I'm going to take just one more time. We've gone from being annoyed to frustrated to angry. When 15 people decide to name one of these NAAs a snitch, and they discuss it, and they still decide it, you know they're angry. And I am not a Svengali who can manipulate people to do what I want. You will hear more about this and more about this and more about this, and you might want to figure out a way to get the discussion on the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And in all fairness, I have to be consistent with the public comment. That's why I'm giving a minute, as I gave Mr. Herman. But for people who sign up for items, I will be giving 2 minutes. Next, for public comment, I do have no other public comment. Okay, thank you. So, seeing that there is no other public comment, I'd like to close public comment. And Mr. Cedillo, if you don't have a problem with it, I'd like to propose items 4, 5, and 6 be approved on consent. Thank you. Oh, wait, do we have any, no, nothing signed up for those, right? Thank you, Mr. Cedillo. Now, I'd like to move those items, and now I'd like to move to item number 1. Mr. CLA, if you could read them into the record.
Mr. Chairman, item number 1, it's the General Manager, Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, to give a presentation on its 2018-19 budget request and preparations for the 2019 Neighborhood Council elections.
Thank you. And if the department, oh, Gracie, you're already up here. If you could provide us with an update on the fiscal year 18-19 budget request and your preparations for and in particular, your preparation for the 2019 elections.
Thank you. Good afternoon, council members. Gracie Liu, General Manager for the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment. I have passed out a summary of our executive summary that we submitted for our budget proposal, and it provides you more details than what I'm going to summarize. So if you have any questions, you'll have it in front of you as well. For the proposed budget for fiscal year 2018-2019, we are requesting $4.8 million approximately, which is an increase of 70% from the approved budget of this fiscal year. The reasons that we have that is because we have elections next year, so we did put in an elections package, and we also have a funding of the Office of Civic Engagement, which is a program that we are putting together this year, which focuses on civic engagements within city departments and making sure that there's adequate training and centralizing all civic engagement activity into one website. So this ask also includes 21 positions spread out over the various programs. The first program that we have is the ongoing support of the neighborhood councils in terms of training and meeting operations. And the second is the outreach and communications for the elections. The third would be the Office of Civic Engagement, as I mentioned before. We also have our typical administrative services, which includes the request for assistant general manager and some office trainees and accounting clerks. And the last program is the policy and government relations. And we would like to expand that program in terms of having liaisons working on emergency preparedness, as well as assisting neighborhood councils with various city directives, such as cannabis, homelessness, all of these city directives that are right now we are utilizing our current field staff to provide information to the neighborhood councils. The overall goal is to try to provide support for neighborhood councils where the neighborhood empowerment advocates or project coordinators would be a ratio of 1 to 5 neighborhood councils. Right now we're at 1 to 6 to 7, and it's still a lot of work for our staff who are expected to not only provide meeting support for neighborhood councils, but to also conduct outreach. This leads me to the outreach for elections next year. This current fiscal year, we have $106,000, and we were tasked with holding town halls with neighborhood councils in order to work with them collaboratively to come up with an outreach plan for elections for 2019. Next month, we will be working with the Office of the City Clerk and partnering with them to hold meetings around the city where they're going to be talking about the actual administering the elections, and we're going to be talking with the neighborhood councils about outreach. So we're going to collaborate with that, and we anticipate to have an outreach plan ready to launch in April of this year, so that when we can have all the templates and outreach materials ready by July 1st. This has been an ongoing issue in the past where the neighborhood councils that go first in the elections, who are in the valley, they typically don't get the benefit of any outreach materials that we create if we don't start the planning process before July 1st. That is the plan for that. And within your packet, you'll have a breakdown of our election outreach request for next year for neighborhood councils elections, and part of it has a graph of the existing demographics of neighborhood councils and how we want to make sure that neighborhood councils are inclusive of the actual populations that we see in the census, as well as the age range. So neighborhood councils tend to skew older, whereas the citywide age range tends to skew younger. And gender-wise, we're actually doing pretty good for neighborhood councils. In the current demographics show that City of LA is approximately 50% female, 49% male, and neighborhood councils have 44% female on the in the council's system. And then if you look to, there's also a breakdown of race, and generally we are not in line with the current census of the race statistics, and we would like to focus our outreach on making sure that neighborhood councils are representative of their communities. And you also have a flyer that shows the 26th election outreach campaign that we did, the materials that we used from bus benches to banners, and how to our social media campaign and how successful they were. So we'll be taking this information to the town halls and having neighborhood councils take a look at it and see how we can improve upon this and execute something citywide. I'm happy to take any questions that you have on any of the materials that you have and any comments that you have about what I just presented.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the information. A couple of questions. So what's the biggest difference between this year and last year's budget? And what the dollar amount? I know you're proposing office engagement as well as elections outreach division, I guess, if we could call it that. But, if you could highlight what you feel the key biggest differences.
Well, those are the two programs that we are not executing on at that level. Like, for instance, Office of Civic Engagement is being funded by a Fuse Fellow. We have basically $150,000 set aside for a Fuse Fellow to work on doing Office of Civic Engagement. By next fiscal year, we anticipate the foundations of the Office of Civic Engagement will be in place so that we can now actually staff it and start running that office. And then with elections, we were, as I mentioned before, provided $106,000 this year, and that was just to do some basic preparation for the elections. And now we are, for next fiscal year, we are asking for the full package for the outreach. And so that's why you see the big difference in the ask. And it's basically going to be like that way. Every other year when there's an election, we're just going to have an increase.
So what's the dollar amount difference, just for the public?
Oh, so the total dollar amount difference from this current fiscal year and last year is $1.988 million.
What, in the total budget request?
Yes, that's a total budget request.
1.988?
Yeah.
So, clearly, I think when we did all the outreaches and everything that we talked about, civic engagement as well as election outreach, as well as, I guess part of civic engagement is alerting community members and letting people know that neighborhood councils exist. And I think this is probably one of the most crucial areas, and especially this year because it's an election year, election outreach is crucial. And on your flow chart, I see it all as proposed, and nobody filling those slots. Since we know it's that important and that crucial, isn't it, is there a reason why you created a brand new division without any slots being filled, while instead of moving over some of your existing staff so that they could get started already on election outreach as well as civic engagement, or has that already been going on?
That is already going on. We, this current fiscal year, our neighborhood empowerment advocates also conduct Neighborhood Council 101, and they go to workshops, and they go to different communities that we identify in each of the neighborhood councils in order to reach out to those communities that are underrepresented. And so that's actually part of our performance metrics this year, that we'll conduct at least 97, but we're already over 100 on those. And my plan is to continue doing that face-to-face and educating the community members about neighborhood councils and working with neighborhood councils to identify which communities that they haven't had the opportunity to reach out to. Because we may be able to have some translation money that's one of the reasons they've not been able to reach out to them, and we can utilize some of our translation funds in order to go to those communities.
Yeah, I know the translation is another hot topic that we have later on the agenda. So obviously I'm looking at the old flow chart, the new flow chart. So your current structure is you have your existing employees doing all the outreach then?
That's correct. And don't forget, every one of our project coordinators, 50% of their job is meeting operations, and the other 45% is outreach, and then the 5% is like projects, like their liaison for the homeless, or that we're doing civic university, or some other project. So there's not any one person that's just focused on outreach, because we have to still provide that meeting support.
Right, so currently you have 25 employees, you have 3 vacancies, and you're asking for an additional 18.
Right. Well, actually, we just filled our vacancies.
Oh, you filled your
yes,
vacancies.
They're actually sitting in here.
How long does it take to fill your vacancies?
Well, it depends on the step increase or step level that they start at. But this year, we were funded for the 9 months, and so we were just able to hire. It typically takes about a 45-day process.
Oh, you could fill in 45 days.
Right. These are exempt positions, that's why.
Okay, so the 18 new, oh, those are exempt. Okay, but the 18 new positions, if you get it granted, how fast can you fill those?
The exempt positions, 45 days, and the civil service, depending on if there's a list. We could do it pretty quickly if there's already an established list.
From the 18, they all look like civil service, except for maybe 1 or 2, right?
No, most of them are exempt.
All 18?
Not all 18, I'm sorry, I don't have a breakdown in terms of which ones. Let me see. There's 21 positions that we are asking for, and looks like 1, 2.
I counted 18, not 21.
If you look at this executive summary, oh, you're looking at that chart. There's a breakdown in terms of each one of these, and we have 21 positions, and out of those, it looks like two of them are civil service, and the remaining are exempt.
And the remainder are exempt?
Yep.
Wow. How many exempt positions do you have total for your department?
The whole breakdown?
Yeah, the entire.
I don't have that right in front of me right now, but the majority of our positions are exempt because we run elections, and we're able to get an exemption from the 200 citywide.
Yeah, that's a huge advantage compared to many other departments. I mean, it seems like most departments, even the larger departments, have the total number of exemptions equal to yours,
Yes,
to your department.
Well, it's, the nature of our work. We operate very much, I feel, like a city council office because, the work is constantly changing as neighborhood councils are evolving. And, we just have to, keep up with that skill set.
Okay. Well, let me get to my other question. I don't want to be, I want to give Councilmember Cedillo an opportunity to ask questions too. But, I mean, I like your plan and especially the fact that we need to heavily focus on election outreach as well as civic engagement. But, I mean, so have you considered shifting over existing staff to get it started?
So we are starting it this fiscal year with 106, and the existing staff will work with the neighborhood councils in the town halls to get it started. And the neighborhood council 101s, we're already building on top of that. So that's actually just part of, outreach for elections shouldn't just be in the election years. It has to be constant. So that's why we've built it into our workload now, that we're constantly doing outreach in addition to meeting support.
And this is great what you did for the 2016 election outreach, and it looks very robust and it looks very good. But as we know, in 2016, as well as all previous years, the biggest feedback we hear from neighborhood councils is not enough election outreach has been done. Right. So while it looks nice on paper, I mean, if this is what we did in 2016, we probably need to triple or quadruple what we did back then.
Agreed.
Right?
And back then, neighborhood council, we weren't funded really to do a lot of outreach. Each year we were probably funded 100 to 200,000 to do a citywide campaign, and that's, as you would think, it's not enough to do a citywide campaign. So we partnered with neighborhood councils so that neighborhood councils could also use some of their funding to localize their election outreach campaign. But the complaint that we received in 2016 was that neighborhood councils didn't want to do that. They felt that it was unrealistic for them to try to find candidates to run against themselves.
Right.
So they wanted the city to take on more of that responsibility, which is why we have a more robust ask.
So what has done now it's been about 9 months since we deferred the election. And one of the reasons Don, as well as Bonk, and majority of the neighborhood councils asked for a deferral of the elections in 2018 was so we can have a robust outreach and robust election cycle in 19. And now we're basically back at square one. So what have we done what has Don done in the last 9 months specifically, besides I guess the 100 outreaches to the neighborhood councils, which is probably about one per council. What else has been done?
So in addition to that outreach that we're doing there, we are going and making contact with various nonprofits and working with them to learn more about how to reach underrepresented areas. For instance, we're partnering with Advancement Project in order to learn some of their techniques and partnering with them to they actually are an intermediary. They're going to also work with 4 other nonprofits or in various areas around the city. And so we're going to partner with them to reach out to community members that we typically don't hear from and that don't know anything about the neighborhood council system. And that's part of our recruitment process. We've launched a few educational programs like Ignite, which is to educate girls and young women on how to run for office. And so when we do that, we are reaching to the youth population that we haven't, that aren't actually represented very well as the young women and the girls too within the neighborhood council system. And we also are partnering with millennial groups.
I'm sorry?
Millennial groups like Global Shapers in order to have them evaluate the neighborhood councils to see what it is that's keeping them from participating in the neighborhood council system. So some of this is working on these partnerships while we staffed up to go ahead and start the town halls with the city clerk to complete the election outreach plan.
Do you guys have a social media strategy yet, or a media strategy or anything like that? Who are you working with on that, or is it in-house? Or
so we are doing in-house because we don't want to use the 106 until we get the neighborhood councils to have their buy-in and input on this. Some of our media strategies are existing media or social media like campaigns about educating people about neighborhood councils. We started a podcast, which you kindly was one of the interviewees, and so we're getting that out there for people just talking about neighborhood councils. We also work with City Watch, and they have a whole neighborhood councils page and why you should be involved in neighborhood councils, and we make sure that we have folks that they interview to talk about what's important about neighborhood councils and why people should be participating.
how much of the 106,000 has been expended already?
We haven't spent that.
You haven't spent anything at all?
Right, because this is with our existing funds, because 106, we were specifically instructed by council to make sure that we work in neighborhood councils in order to figure out how to spend that 106.
And do you have that plan now, the 106,000?
The plan is going to be put together over the town halls in February, so we'll have the plan ready by April, and then for execution.
Isn't April too late? Because isn't it April? Okay, April. The first election is going to be when?
It'll be a year from April, likely. If we maintain the same, it'll be April 2019. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm just very concerned. We had a 9-month head start. Don had a 9-month head start to do robust outreach. I haven't really seen the translation of that or seen the fruits of that yet. And, as one of the previous speakers, public comment speakers mentioned about, I would hope that we divert more of our existing resources and staff power to more training, to more outreach, to more support versus regulation. We all know there's lots of things that we need to fix. But right now it's an election. Election year is going to come for neighborhood councils. So the more outreach we could do, and I think from all the town halls and everything we've done, we've gotten so much ideas, and Dunn needs to be very forward-thinking. I'm glad you're working with the millennials. I'm glad you're working with Ignite for women, and but the time for reaching out with nonprofits to figure out how better you could outreach, we just got to just do it. So that's why I did the first podcast. When someone else asked about lawmakers change, but the response for that was very low. So, I mean, I'm willing, my office is willing, and as the chair of this committee, I'm willing to support your department in every which way. So if you come up with any innovative ideas, and I think many were generated from neighborhood councils, I think we need to implement them as soon as possible, because this next cycle, I don't think we're going to get a break, because we had that extra 9 months. So.
Right. And I totally understand your point of view on this one. I do have to say, though, council member, that if you take away, like some neighborhood councils have not had support at their meetings for a long time, and they were very grateful to have, like, now we're staffing 100% of the neighborhood council meetings. That hasn't happened since 2009. Mm-hmm. And they're very grateful for that support. I know that there's some conflict in terms of, the last speaker about Brown Act, but that's part of our role is to make sure the city doesn't incur liability.
Right.
And also, too, that if we're doing outreach and saying, hey, everyone come to a neighborhood council meeting, they go to a neighborhood council meeting, and it's like all over the place, no one's going to want to go run for neighborhood council. Mm-hmm. So you have to have that balance.
Right.
So I can't divert all of my resources from meeting operation support to just straight outreach and then leave everybody hanging.
Right.
So it is challenging, which is why we haven't been able to do this, crazy, big, huge, outreach campaign in the 9 months. We've just been building on trying to make existing relationships and also building new relationships, so that when elections come and we do the candidate call, they'll be there.
Right.
We'll have these.
Well, however it happened in the past, neighborhood councils have survived over a decade. Some neighborhood councils operate better than others. Others are barely hanging on. Mm-hmm. But whatever the case, it's still here. And I remember when I was part of my own neighborhood council, and when we had the Dunn representative, the NEA representative, come to neighborhood council, it was more frustrating than not, because it was always, oh, you can't do that, you can't do this, So, and of course, we have to protect the city, and I'm glad that you're finally staffing every single neighborhood council meeting. That's great. But we want neighborhood councils to see Dunn in the city as a resource and a partner, not someone who's restrictive. Look, and it's not just Dunn. Even with my own discretionary funds, we give money out to the community for discretionary funds, and sometimes it takes a year for that money to get there. Mm-hmm. That's just unacceptable. And that's why, instead of us telling them no, and before, when you weren't staffing it, they were doing it anyways. So it's a matter of trying to augment, not hinder. But no, it's a daunting task, and that's why I'm saying I'm open to every idea. I mean, I welcome you in my office, whether you're meeting with me directly or your staff meeting with my staff. I mean, let's do 10 new ideas, and if 2 works and the other 8 doesn't, it's fine. Well, we have to change this reputation and to show that we're more supportive. But Mr. Cedillo, do you have any questions?
I appreciate your comments. I don't think we should have an either-or disposition with respect to outreach and then governance. I think we should have an expectation of both. There's no point of outreach if there's no governance. There's no point of governance if no one participates. And so we're here to help and figure out how we can make sure you have the resources to do both. The election year is obviously very important, and my interest is looking at the charts and who participates in the city. You have half the cities is Hispanic, Latino, whatever the phrase you want to use, yet the participation is only 20%, like 19. And so I'm concerned about that and how we make that a more equitable, more robust participation. And so what that takes me to is, how are we communicating to the Spanish language community? How frequent, and what are we doing both in the governance side and in the outreach side? So tell me about that.
So currently, we only do outreach into the Latino communities, Spanish speaking, when we have elections, and because that's when we're funded for it. What we want to do is to try to make it an annual thing.
Let me ask you this. So if half the population's Spanish speaking, are we doing our outreach, half the budget is in Spanish?
Currently, no. And
What percentage of the budget would be in Spanish?
I would say very, very little, and that's what we're trying to change. And in the past, when neighborhood councils, and this goes into the translation item later on, but neighborhood councils find it cost prohibitive to do the outreach because in the past, election outreach was conducted at the local level by the neighborhood councils. And so if they weren't doing that translation and interpretation and having interpretation available at meetings, then the department couldn't do it either because we weren't funded to provide 97 neighborhood councils with that type of translation interpretation. So we only focused our Spanish-speaking outreach during election years. We would, send to Spanish-speaking radio or newspapers and try to push it out that way. So that is our hope, is to try to change some of that. For instance, in South LA, there should be more Latinos on boards if we were going to represent the communities there, but that's not the case right now. And I think a lot of it has to do with translation, interpretation, and someone going just to those communities and inviting them to be a part of the system.
I'm troubled by that. We speak over 100 plus languages. The mayor will tell us the exact number. He's brilliant at doing that. How many languages we speak in the city, and yet if we're not communicating, then how do we expect people to participate? If we're only doing English, then only the English-speaking community will participate. I understand that English should be a baseline language, but the fact of the matter is the first day, the first week, the first year, maybe the first decade that people arrive to the city, they're speaking another language. How do we ensure that they still get full participation, both in the outreach and in the governance, if we're only in one language?
Agreed. And this year was the first year that we, intentionally took a part of our budget and we do a neighborhood council monthly profile, which just breaks down all the information for neighborhood councils going on in the city and what's going on with their neighborhood council, and we translate that into 3 languages. And it's expensive, but as you noted, we should be doing this. And neighborhood councils, it's very difficult for them to do it with their. Can you imagine doing all their agendas, all the documentation that they have to do to translate that, and also to provide interpretation at meetings. So it's the cost is it's high. So we should dedicate more funds to that. But we're trying to prioritize how do we do a citywide outreach to begin with, and we can't even do it in English right now. And so we're just trying to find different ways, and that's why we are trying to partner with some of these nonprofits that may be able to help us get some of the messaging in language to those communities that we can't reach because of funding.
Mr. Chairman, I'm really distressed about this. Recently a hospital closed in my district, and I found that there's 3 Asian dialects being spoken that was servicing the API community. If we're not speaking the language that people speak and live here with, then we're not communicating to them, and we're leaving them out of this very important institution. And they have a right to participate. They pay the same taxes. They pay the same prices. They have same standing in our community, except for the fact that we are making decisions where we are prioritizing English only. If we have a budget for communications or an outreach and we only do it in English, then we're making a value judgment that is the only language that's valued in a city that speaks over 100 languages. And so we have to reassess that and figure out how we can proportionately structure the allotment in a way that's more representative of the entirety of the city of Los Angeles.
And that's very true, Councilmember, and I think that's why you're seeing some subdivisions happening, because the neighbor councils are trying to subdivide based on some neighbor councils' language needs. One of the subdivisions coming forward is Historic Cultural Neighbor Council, and they spend the majority of their budget on translation because they have, different languages, Asian dialects that they have to do, and so we've received a subdivision application from there, I think, just for that reason.
Thank you, Mr. Cedillo, and I think your comments are well taken, and I am concerned as well. But this is why I am going to support and do all I can for your budget request, because yes, I think you could do great with what you have, but again, I know your department has been cut and never fully funded or never fully staffed. So I do want to give you the benefit of the doubt and try to give you those resources. And it's not new resources, it's just resources that were promised to you from the past. So I want to acknowledge that. But and I think when you do have an augmentation of 21 staff, that's going to be a tremendous augmentation. And I think your concerns, Mr. Cedillo, can be addressed properly so that we do robustly do outreach. And I think that's the key thing, outreach for elections. And we heard it again and again. And when I went and did the circuit and met with all the alliances and as many neighborhood councils as possible, it was the number one thing was everything surrounding outreach. Outreach for elections, outreach for just neighborhood councils, outreach to let people know that they exist, just everything and anything to help publicize. And I think right now there's lots of changes. We have the city clerk involved. We're doing more global things, and we're going to talk about translation later to help and augment your department. It's very, very crucial that we really deliver this time. And I think it's very important that these meetings are run properly, Brown Act and all of that. But at the same time, a properly run meeting isn't going to attract people to want to come to the meeting. So, I'm like, let's get them there first. And then if the meeting runs, look, even the most professionally organized homeowners association or neighbor councils gets a big ruckus. But that's fine too. It just means people are that much excited and that tense. And we could work on it once we get them there. But problem at most neighborhood councils is people get voted with 2 votes. No one comes to neighborhood council meetings. So those are the bigger issues. And let's get people there first and then deal with whether, they made the motion correct or not. And let's get those monies out. If the neighborhood council deems that they want to give some money to the farmers market, let's make sure that money gets out there as fast as possible. If they want to publicize something, let's make sure we get them all the approvals to get that flyer out or whatever it is. So, but bottom line is we deferred. I was really against deferring the election, but after hearing the situation in the state that we're in, and especially with the online voting and everything else, I thought we needed the extra time. So this is the time that we really have to prove, and let's have a robust election turnout. Let's have a robust people knowing that neighborhood councils exist. So, so thank you for that. Go ahead, Mr. Steele. Another question?
I heard you said a couple of times, you said we're going to go towards translation. I don't see it. Is there a request in the budget for translation resources?
There's, what we do every year we've basically asked for any unused neighborhood council funding to be set aside. It's likely not in that, what you have right now, but to be set aside into a special fund that would be for translation, capacity building, and outreach, because typically every year neighborhood councils don't spend between $400,000 to $600,000, and so that could be set aside so that neighborhood councils could apply directly to satisfy their translation needs, outreach, capacity building.
So in item number 3, we're going to bring that up, but that budget request is already in your budget, right? For number 3.
We make it every year, yes.
Yeah, okay. And we'll talk more about it in item number 3, Mr. Steele.
Sure, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. If there's anything else you want to add before I take public comment?
No,
No.
thank you. Thank you for your time.
Great. We have a couple of people signed up for public comment. We have a new system here, so I'm learning our new system. So these 3 names, right? So could I get Maruf Islam, Mark Masuri, and Laura Velke come on up? Why don't you guys all sit up on front? And I'll give you guys 2 minutes each. And whoever's up first could start.
Go last.
Okay. State your name.
My name is Maruf Islam. I'm from Wilshire Center area, which is Little Bangladesh and Koreatown. And thank you, David Rowe and Galcerio and everyone to giving me this opportunity. Currently, we applied for subdivision, which is the Wilshire Center, Little Bangladesh Neighborhood Council. The reason we...
Oh, this is item number 1 on the budget. If you want to talk about subdivision, that's item number 2. Did you want to comment on...
that? Then
You want to
I'll
skip?
talk later.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Laura or Mark? Okay.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Laura Velke. I'm the 3rd VP and Chair of the Land Use Committee for the HCNC. I'm an extremely active and engaged community member, and I participated in this neighborhood council system for several years now, and I can tell you right now that outreach isn't the problem. We literally do no outreach, and we get some of the highest turnout in the city for our elections. So I don't think it's an outreach problem. What should be happening is a redefinition of the stakeholder, or the definition of stakeholder needs to be adjusted. It's gotten to the point where we have people from Santa Monica who claim they go to church in someone else's community, say in Chinatown, and they now have influence over an entire community. We need to take back our neighborhood councils. This is the problem that we're seeing. It's not an outreach problem, it's a stakeholder definition problem. To go with that, the subdivision, by allowing subdivisions to go forward without a stakeholder definition revision.
So we're talking about item number 1 on the budget right now. If you hold on the subdivision part, that's item number 2.
Right, I understand that. So the point being is that until we resolve these issues, there doesn't need to be more money in the budget. We need to actually redirect those funds to actually properly train the staff at Dunn. They're not communicative. None of us have a copy of what has been presented to this chamber at all. None of the NCs get to see what's happening. We're told periodically that it's embedded at the bottom of an email that we're supposed to look at. Neighborhood councils are spending all their time talking about subdivision, online voting, and all our resources are being pointed to that instead of to our communities. That's why I joined this board. I've been blocked from funding a dog park in my community because it doesn't qualify. I mean, it's just an endless series of problems.
Thank you.
I have a lot more to say,
Yeah,
but...
and you're going to talk on item number 2, and that's...
Okay.
Mark.
Oh, council members, this is like Christmas. All right. So what you're being asked to is throw money at a problem, which has not worked out really well in the past. I could speak for hours on this. What I'm going to tell you is the general managers have said part of their job is to protect you from incurred liability. You all have documents, flow charts. The Brown Act says in Neighborhood Council 101, we are trained at the same time we distribute these materials to our board, we must make them available to the public. Right now, the person who is the vanguard for neighborhood councils not incurring liability in the city just gave you a liability. Ask the city attorney. That's the problem. Okay? Next. I can't go down. I'm just saying is none of these things are available. It's not in your agenda. It's not online. This doesn't even have a council item number. So there's a problem here. And if these are the folks who are teaching everyone else, 96 councils downstream, how to do business, you might want to look at the overarching organization. So I'm going to cut to the chase because of the small amount of time. If you want to get a clear picture of what is going on in the NC system, you cannot get report backs from the people who are affected. You need to bring in a management consultant, Galperin has a bunch of them, who looks at it and says, look, to make this department effective, this is what has to do. You need an unadulterated, unbiased opinion, or else you're just going to be talking about this over and over again. There's one neighborhood council, a couple neighborhood councils. Los Feliz is having a neighborhood council election in 2018. They're calling it a selection, but it's an election. We are locked and loaded with outreach. We will spend 1/10 of what they're asking for, and we will have candidates for every one of our things, and we will stock our polls. You were told that this is impossible. We're afraid that they're going to make it really hard for us to succeed. Because if we succeed, they have failed. And that's why I'm here today. I don't want roadblocks put in front of me when we're doing what we're supposed to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing there's no more public comment cards, we will go to item number 2. Item number 2, Mr. CLA, if you could read that in, please. And this is the subdivision. This is the one, we should have maybe taken up this item first, but Mr. CLA, if you could read it in, please.
Mr. Chairman, item number 2 is the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners report and the Dunn report relative to amending the Los Angeles City Administrative Code to revise the subdivision ordinance and related matters.
Thank you. If we could have a representative from Dunn come on up, and actually we also have a representative from Bonk. Board of Neighborhood Commission, come on up as well. And if you could report, Gracie?
Gracie Liu, General Manager for the Department of Labor Empowerment. The report that I have, and my apologies on this one, we were reporting back on subdivision online voting, and part of our online voting subdivision report is basically recommending that we take on the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners' recommendations for changes in the ordinance. This item is strictly on the ordinance, and the report back for us was on a different council file that City Council asked us to do.
Right, just to clarify what our general manager has stated, yes, I am going to hear this item because we do have a lot of folks who wanted to come and speak on this, but we can't take a vote on it today, Mr. Cedillo. We're going to defer it for 2 weeks because, yes, some of the information that should have been public prior to this meeting was posted to the wrong agenda item. So we will hear this item, we will take public comment, but we will have to defer it for, push it back for 2 weeks for a vote. But go ahead.
So the report back that we were asked to provide was on the Skid Row Neighborhood Council subdivision election on April 6, 2017. In short, though we were given approval from City Council to conduct this online voting about 2 weeks prior to the election date, it was overall a success. We had 1,388 people vote at our elections, and the majority of those, 1,186, were cast online. I thought that this was an excellent test, again, of the online voting, taking what we learned in 2016, making adjustments, and rolling it out in a very short time for Skid Row Neighborhood Council. There were still glitches with voter registration. We have a whole attachment in terms of some of the issues that we saw that we think that would have to be improved for the next round. I know that City Clerk is already working with Everyone Counts on looking at a new voter registration platform that Everyone Counts has that is more fluid than the one that we used. However, given the success of the online voting with the subdivision elections, we would like to include them as another form of voting for the subdivision elections that we anticipate will happen in late April or May of this year, possibly even June. We had 4 applications for subdivision, the first being North Westwood Neighborhood Council from the Westwood Neighborhood Council. That's basically UCLA and Westwood Village area. The second being North Historic Cultural Neighborhood Council from Historic Cultural Neighborhood Council. That would be Chinatown, Victor Heights, Solano Canyon from Little Tokyo and the Arts District. The third would be the Little Bangladesh Neighborhood Council from Wilshire Center, Koreatown Neighborhood Council, and they're also asking for part of Rampart Village Neighborhood Council. And that's basically the north, like if you look at Wilshire Center Careertown Neighborhood Council, you would just take it from where little Bangladesh is, and north of that would be that new neighborhood council. And the last is one in the valley called the Laurel Grove Neighborhood Council, and that would be subdividing, if allowed to proceed, from NoHo Neighborhood Council and Greater Valley Glen Council. We thought that the voter registration process, although it was very challenging, it provided an additional way to do outreach that was very exciting for folks, and sometimes very frustrating because of the documentation requirement. Then some people couldn't, provide us or didn't want to provide us documentation over online. So it still generated a lot of interest in the whole process, and we think that even though it is time-consuming, it is still well worth it to have subdivision with online voting in addition to the actual polling day location. And that's why we'd recommend if City Council would lift the moratorium on online voting to allow us to provide online voting for subdivision elections. That would be, I think, our first choice, and we're hoping that that decision could be made, or at least a direction could be told to us by February 15th. That's when Everyone Counts has told us that they would need to have the time to build out some of these platforms, as only Historic Cultural Neighborhood Council had online voting in 2016. So the other ones, if they were to move forward to election, would need to be built out, and we would need some time for that. The second part of our report states that the department is supportive of the Board of Neighborhood Commissioners' recommendations for subdivision change in their ordinance, and that overall, the two major changes is more outreach, and the second would be that the commission would do the final approval of the subdivision application before it goes to election. Those are essentially the two major changes in the ordinance, so we're supportive of that. And I'm happy to take any questions if you have.
Mr. Schaefer, would you want to add as a Representative Blanc?
Yes, Councilmember Rue, Councilmember Cedillo. This amendment came about because of a hearing that we had at one of the recent subdivisions, as well as comments by people who came and spoke with regards to the Skid Row subdivision. I can say that it was a rather painful experience because of what happened with regards to boundaries and such. The stakeholders from neighboring areas of a particular neighborhood council, although the response from the department when asked at elections was a truthful response. They were asked about boundaries and such, and the response was the only thing you're voting for is whether or not there should be a subdivision. And that was true, because it was then up to the commission after the subdivision had been okayed to review the boundaries and such, but they were already pretty well set in stone. So the two things, as was related by General Manager Liu, is with regards to subdivision A of the existing ordinance would be increased outreach, B is increased outreach, and C is a brand new section which gives the commission the review of the petition itself. The idea being, while the petition itself may technically qualify, is it within the spirit of neighborhood councils? Will it do more harm than good to surrounding neighborhood councils? I know of one in the San Fernando Valley that may be proposed that would end up basically as a business district, and that would not benefit public councils, neighborhood councils, or be within the spirit of them, although technically the department could say, yes, that's a valid petition. Then the commission would also make a decision with regards to the boundaries. Were these suitable boundaries? They would give the people at a hearing, a public hearing, the opportunity to come in and say why the boundaries may be correct, why they may be impinging upon other areas of currently established neighborhood councils. And the commission could then take all of that into consideration and make a final decision on boundaries. And then lastly, with regards to bylaws, were the bylaws within the proper parameters of the plan, should any changes be made and such as that. The matter would then go out for election. That way, neighborhood council members would know precisely what they were voting for, yes or no, up or down. And that is the major difference. I go to a lot of meetings. I've heard a lot of comments with regards to subdivision, both Skid Row and the Herman. And there's a certain amount of disconnect between the neighborhood councils and what occurred. They wanted more opportunity. I know that the department conducted outreach and they conducted town halls and such as that, but they would rather have the opportunity to speak to what they consider a more public forumed decision maker. And that's why some of this came about. And some of the last thing I'll mention is there may be a conflict between what we put up and what the city attorney would like to do, because the city attorney had recommended permissive as opposed to mandatory. They had may and should as opposed to shall. And at the commission meeting where the final recommendation was made, all of those could and shall and mays were converted back to shalls. We know that sometimes it will be difficult, but the neighborhood councils that have spoken to me and at different locations and the ones that came to our meetings have made it clear that they wanted more certainty. So that's why we changed it back and we have the shalls in there instead of may and could or should.
Thank you. Thank you. We are not voting on this today, but just a couple of quick questions. So are the four, well, can you just state the current neighborhood councils are currently seeking to subdivide?
The four that are currently seeking to subdivide are North Westwood Neighborhood Council from Westwood Neighborhood Council, North Historic Cultural Neighborhood Council from Historic Cultural Neighborhood Council, Little Bangladesh Neighborhood Council from Wilshire Center Careertown Neighborhood Council, and Rampart Village Neighborhood Council. Just a side note on that, Little Bangladesh, they've requested a change to their name to Wilshire Center Little Bangladesh Neighborhood Council. And then the fourth one would be Laurel Grove Neighborhood Council from North Hollywood Neighborhood Council and Greater Valley Glen Council in the Valley.
And there's no one else?
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah. Another question. So I know this addresses subdivisions from existing neighborhood councils, but what of those certain situations where a neighborhood council actually wants to not create their own neighborhood? I mean, a portion of a neighborhood council doesn't want to create their own neighborhood council, but wants to join a different neighborhood council. Does this subdivision ordinance address that at all?
No, it currently does not in the way that it's written. The only way to address that is for both the neighborhood council that this area would be trying to leave and the other neighborhood council that is trying to go to, for them to both pass a boundary adjustment application allowing for that change. But we know several instances that the one or both neighborhood councils don't want to do the boundary adjustment, and that area is really mad. So, yeah, so there's nothing that can be done.
So in that, it becomes a stalemate then, and they can't?
That's correct. There's literally nothing that we can do.
So the residents of that particular area, their only option is to become their own neighborhood council then?
They could carve out a whole area that would be their own neighborhood council. It would have to meet the minimum 20,000 stakeholders in order to satisfy a subdivision.
Okay. Mr. Cedillo, do you have any questions?
No, we're not voting on this today.
Yeah, we're not voting on this today, but everyone will have 2 bites at the apple 2 weeks from now. I'm going to have some of the public comment people who signed up for public comment to come up and speak, and that is Maruf Islam, Jaron Islam, and Mark Masari. If I could have the three of them come up. And Laura, you're up here too. Well, actually, there's 4 seats. Well, you can come up too, Laura. Feel free to start. Say your name.
Maruf Islam. Thank you again. We're currently applying for subdivision, which is called Wilshire Center, Little Bangladesh Neighborhood Council. The reason we are doing it for this area, the boundary we chosen, this community don't even know what is neighborhood council. They don't know where to go in the city, how they can get help from the community. So when we collected for the signature from the stakeholder, we knock door to door, we outreach the community, Spanish community, Bangladeshi community, Asian, all the Asian community, and white, every ethnicity. And everyone saying it's a great idea. And we want a part of this new neighborhood council, the region, so they want to get into with the city and all the things they can get changed. And more to my wife, Jen Islam, she will address that. Thank you.
Can I take his time?
Yes.
Oh, you have your own 2 minutes. Yeah. State your name.
Good afternoon. My name is Jaron Islam. I'm actually the board executive vice president of Wilshire Center Careertown Neighborhood Council. So I am also part of the petition that is asking for the subdivision from the current council under the name of Wilshire Center Little Bangladesh Neighborhood Council. The reason why the community wants to subdivide is they felt that they have never been represented in this council or in the city anywhere in general. We have outreach, but this community, and it's not specifically the Bangladeshi, but it's this north section of the Wilshire Center here that never had the outreach done, that never knew neighborhood councils existed until I joined the board, where we started doing a lot of outreach, and that included door to door. This is a community that's part of the LA's Promise Zone that has some of the highest illiteracy rates, some of the highest dropout rates, 1 in 3 people earning less than $20,000 in our neighborhood. So you can see we're a very disadvantaged community, and we're trying to bring this community out of the situation they are in, and that's only through advocacy. Only when they have a voice at the table can they bring themselves up, can this community come out of where they are. The other major problem is it's the high immigrant population. So like our council member Sedillo said, the first people who arriving here without knowing the language, without knowing the system, they're pushed into the shadows, even though they're green card holders. They're pushed into the shadows because they're so afraid to ask and represent themselves. So this community, when we did a lot of outreach, we were shocked to see that a high proportion couldn't even sign their names. They had to ask their children, middle school, high school children, to come and kind of get a better understanding of what we were asking. And we saw the huge need of representation and advocacy, and that's why we decided we wanted to sub-split. And if we're asking about, the effort, we had Wilshire Center Careertown Neighborhood Council for years. This community have never seen it. I mean, the last few, we were in EE when I came onto the board, we were in EE.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Laura?
Good afternoon again, Laura Velke for the record. Just as a point of clarification, the HCNC is not seeking a subdivide. One person is seeking a subdivide on our neighborhood council. That subdivision is going to impact several communities, specifically defined communities, including the community of Solano Canyon, which is 70% Hispanic. They do not want to leave. So only the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment would qualify an election as a success that disenfranchised 70% African American community. It's unconscionable what happened in that community. 2 weeks before the election, online voting was added. So you have a community that is trying to, on the ground, gather votes like every other citizen in the United States and every election that's conducted in the United States. The loophole that allowed Ms. Liu to override the panel's opinion to allow that neighborhood council to form has to be removed. It's unconscionable that this happened. This is not a disconnect of NCs, Mr. Schaefer and Ms. Liu. It is the commission and Dunn that is disconnected to the NCs and their communities. Something has to change, and there has to be some logic. Either we care about what's happening in the community, either we care about how people are elected to serve their communities. If we're going to take that away, then just take it away, but stop wasting our time, because all this time is being pulled from the good that we can be doing in our communities and spending time sitting in these hearings. I have a ton of work I have to do today, and I drove out from Northridge to be here to talk about this issue because I care that much about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda.
Councilors Mark Masseri, for the record. Listen, the neighborhood subdivision policy is a good idea, poorly executed, which is kind of commonplace in this milieu. The problem is this, and when it came up, it was a gold rush mentality. There is not one neighborhood council that is, unless they get overridden, that isn't going to take the money. Guess what, guys? Instead of getting $42,000, we're going to get $42,000 to fix all the streets. Who's not going to go for that? Everyone's going to go for that. When this came up 3 years ago, we raised these questions. Have you penciled this out and said, how many councils are likely to succeed? How many have over this many? How many would reach to 20? There were no answers. So our fear is like, okay, you've just created a gold rush mentality. You're going to go to the people in your community and say, you know what? We can get $42,000. That fixes your sidewalks. We're going to fix this. We're going to fix that. Yes, there are examples of neighborhood councils and ones that want to subdivide so that they can better serve their community. I believe that is true. However, there's no measure and there's no human factor in the process that says, you know what, just because your square pegs fit in these square holes doesn't mean you're going to an election. You really got to convince us that you want to do this and it's not about the money. Right? But that's not there. The policy is very simple. Check these boxes and you go to an election, and everyone who goes to an election is going to vote yes. Because that's what happened so far. And that, I will promise you that will continue to happen. And I hope somebody's thought about this, because when it came up and we brought it up, we said, listen, what happens when there's a budget crisis? Who's the first to get cut? Well, presently with 96 councils, we spend this much money. This increases every time, plus the staff to management. All right? That's not whatever the $70K annual. That's over the course of the employee for a lifetime, plus benefits. That's a $2 million head. This was not thought out, like most things. And it needs to be thought out better, because it can be a good thing, but there needs to be some control. Thank you.
Thank you. There will be no vote on this item. Well, Mr. CLA will defer for 2 weeks. And before we move on to item number 3, I just want to comment, many of the governance issues that many speakers are talking about, whether it be stakeholder definition or whether it be budgeting-wise for each neighborhood council, these issues have been heard, and we are working through these issues. In many cases, Bonk has been tasked to it, but we do hear you. And in many cases, we have lots of great neighborhood councils, like our Los Feliz neighborhood council in my own district that does an extreme, amazing job. But we have other neighborhood councils who don't even spend the $42,000 that they're allotted. So that we have a whole gambit of neighborhood councils on how well they're run. But we are addressing those issues. The council has heard, and this committee has heard, and we're working closely with Dunn, Bonk, and the neighborhood councils and all the alliances to resolve many of the governance issues. But now, moving on to item number 3. Mr. CLA, if you could read that in for the record.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, item number 3. This is a Dunn report in response to a budget recommendation relative to instructing Dunn to report on the cost of providing translation services to neighborhood councils that require them, and the feasibility of funding said services from the Neighborhood Empowerment Fund.
Thank you. And I know Mr. Cedillo is very interested in this one as well. Gracie, if you could quickly report on this.
Sure. Gracie Liu, General Manager for the Department of Empowerment. I'm joined by Mike Fong, my Director of Policy and Government Relations, who worked on this report as well. As I mentioned before, in our previous budget proposals, we've always asked for unspent neighborhood council funds that typically range between 400 to 600,000 or more to be set aside in a special fund because we do recognize that there are deficiencies in funding in the areas of translation, outreach, capacity building that we think that neighborhood councils would be more likely to engage in and utilizing translation and interpretation services if it didn't cost them basically their entire $42,000 yearly allocation. So based on that, Council Member Bob Blumenfeld did ask us to do this report back, which was how much do we think that neighborhood councils would actually need to satisfy translation. And, it's difficult to say because, a lot of neighborhood councils aren't offering translation because they're not necessarily doing the outreach that they need to do into communities, monolingual communities, because of the expense. So we based it on, we looked at how much is being spent so far, and it's been increasing each year, which is a good thing that we see from neighborhood councils, that they are actually trying to do some of this in-language outreach. In this current fiscal year, $17,706 with an anticipated cost of $50,000 this fiscal year. And we do note some numbers in terms of, it costs $80 per page to translate. So when you're looking at agendas or attachments to your agendas, it starts to add up. And it will cost between $60 to $100 per hour to have an interpreter there. Sometimes neighborhood councils get a request for interpretation, and they get the interpreter, and the person who requested the interpretation doesn't show up. So I think some neighborhood councils have been burned that way, and so they feel like they don't want to offer that service. When we looked at these numbers and we thought, well, pretty much in the 97 neighborhood councils that we have in the city, that every area probably has some monolingual underserved population that they are not necessarily outreaching to. We just basically did some costs averaging in terms of how much it would cost for each month if each of the neighborhood councils were to do like one language. And that's just for their regular board meeting, not any committee meetings or anything like that. And we estimated that it could cost between $33,000 to $48,000 each month, which on a yearly basis would be about $400,000 to $600,000 annually, which could be covered by the cost if neighborhood councils continue to have unused funding each year in that amount. That's basically the gist of the report. I know Mike's got information if you would like more details on which neighborhood councils are using the translation, what areas and what amounts, if you would like him to go into those details.
Thank you. Actually, I do have that question, but so it is already requested in your fiscal year 18-19 budget.
That's correct. We just asked for the budget, any unused funds to be set aside in a special fund.
Oh, so it wasn't an actual dollar amount?
No, and that's why Councilmember Blumenfeld asked us, well, you just need to figure out what the dollar amount's going to be.
Okay. And the actual amount of expenditure for translation services for the past 5 years, I know it's in your report for the past 4, it seems like it's steadily increasing, but it's roughly from $23,000 in 14-15, and you're projecting about $50,000 this year.
That's correct.
So, if the past years, if this past year is going to be $50,000, I know how you extrapolate it, but then an 800% increase to $400,000 or $600,000 seems a little on the high end. Is there a more realistic figure on what neighborhood councils you think are going to use it, and different analysis?
We could just say, look, what are the 13 that are using it going to do? But then that would ignore the fact that all the other neighborhood councils are not doing the outreach that they need to be doing, and that they should be doing in terms of doing their translations. Like, for instance, Councilmember Cedillo mentioned, with Latinos being over half the population, why isn't everything just automatically translated into Spanish? And that should be the case. And so that's not happening, and we know that's not happening. We know that's not happening in areas of South Los Angeles where the majority of the boards are African American, even though the population down there is now majority Latino. So it's hoping that neighborhood councils that would not have translated would actually, now that there's funding to do so, would go ahead and utilize those funds.
So, I kind of have a concern about that. I mean, while I do want especially our underprivileged populations, historically underprivileged populations, to be reached out to, I know that your monthly profiles, you translate to 4 languages, and I guess the 4 threshold languages. What are the 4?
We do it in, well, obviously it starts in English. We do it in Spanish, Korean, and Chinese. We weren't going to do Armenian, right? Yeah, Spanish, Korean, Chinese. So it's 4 languages,
Right.
but translated only 3.
So, maybe for Spanish it makes more sense, but we have certain areas where it's maybe Spanish speakers are a minority, but then something like a Korean speaker, I am Korean American, and I'm glad that you do it in Korean, but at the same time, to require a Korean language to be translated for every area where it may be not as beneficial, I mean, there could be some cost savings there, right? Why not ask neighborhood councils to ask what languages they want?
Yeah. Well, this was in, we weren't thinking that we were mandate any type of language. It is what neighborhood councils, what languages would you be looking at? And it's also to, by the way, we did get actually specific requests for Korean when we did our neighborhood council profiles for Wilshire Center, Careertown. So we were trying to accommodate our neighborhood council board members in that regard. But we also looked at too, so you're right, maybe one neighborhood council is just going to do some basic, maybe Spanish or language flyers to reach some populations. But once those folks start coming to the meetings, then you have interpretation costs. And if they want to go to a planning and land use meeting, then a committee meeting, then those costs add up. And we already know that in areas such as MacArthur Park Neighborhood Council, who does a lot of translation because majority is Spanish, that they spend a lot of their funds on this. And so we know that some neighborhood councils are going to spend much, much more than other neighborhood councils, which is why we were trying to balance this and say, we think this range is actually realistic.
So I mean, does Don have the ability to target? So if Wilshire Center Koreatown is asking for Korean, maybe just do it for them, not for, you don't have to send out that information to everyone.
So when we do the neighborhood council profiles, the parts that are unique to the neighborhood councils are typically the numbers, and everything else is basically the same for every neighborhood council. So we don't have to do unique translations for each of the neighborhood councils. So it's just one go at it. Which is why it doesn't cost us any more to give it to 97 versus 1.
Okay. Is there a governance policy for funding of the translation services for the public, for neighborhood councils?
When we've talked to the Office of City Attorney, neighborhood councils are not mandated to translate. However, if they receive a request to translate, they are highly recommended to do so, given the fact that the nature of neighborhood councils is to be inclusive of the community, and so they should provide translation. But we already know in some neighborhood councils, there's like historic cultural neighborhood councils, there's a lot of arguments over translation and refusal to do translations or provide interpreters in certain Asian dialects.
CAO, where's the CAO? Yeah. Oh, great. So what are the budget implications of this translation services, assuming the projected high-end rate of $600,000 actually comes to fruition?
Terry Sauer, CAO staff. Councilmember, we're in the process of preparing the budget, the mayor's proposed budget for 18-19. When there are unexpended neighborhood council funds, the first call on those funds in the neighborhood council funding program, those funds are typically used to reduce the need for additional general fund monies. However, because this issue has been raised, we are reviewing both the budget and this report to determine if some of those funds could be earmarked, and a proposal included in the mayor's proposed budget. So we're continuing to work with the department and the mayor's office, and then ultimately with the council to address this issue in a way that we hope would resolve the issue. Realistically, it's early in the budget year, and I certainly cannot am in a position to make commitments that, of course, we would fund $500,000. We would look at expenditure patterns. Typically, that's the type of thing we evaluate. We would have additional discussions with the department. It would also be useful to talk to the city clerk's office to determine how they approach translation for council meetings, how they handle those requests, and see if any of their approach and if there are any economies of scale that could perhaps be put into place. So it's an ongoing process, but we are aware of the issue and would probably look forward to making some recommendation that to be included in the budget or to respond to you further at a later date.
Just, I was wondering, the amount of unspent neighborhood council funds on average, do you have a rough estimate?
Last year, it was around $500,000. It can vary from, it really varies from year to year. It's, so to tell you what it was last year, it's kind of trying to hit a moving target because as more neighborhood councils come online, as the funding program has become more robust, some neighborhood councils do spend all of their allocation.
And last year was the first year where there wasn't a rollover, right?
Actually, the rollover has been suspended for a number of years.
Okay.
I think we started at about 2008, 2009. What was happening there is that money was being unexpended, and as we were looking at the financial crisis the city was facing, the council made a policy decision was made to suspend the rollover.
Thank you. Mr. Cedillo? Great. Public, I think there's public comment on this item as well. So if we could have, thank you, Gracie. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. If we could have Jaron Islam, come on up. Oh, okay, great. So, thank you, Gracie. Thank you to the General Manager. Thank you to the CAO. You know, this report reaffirms that this budget recommendation idea is feasible, but does not provide recommendations. So I'd like to propose that this committee continue this item and instruct the CAO to report back in 45 days on how to implement this translation services funding policy. Is 45 days okay? You need a little more time? I know it's, we're...
Council member, if you could make it closer to 60, in as much as this is an item that is part of the mayor's proposed budget. So until the mayor releases the proposed budget, I can't comment on.
I was thinking the exact same thing. We'll do 60 days, and if you need a little bit more time, contact my office.
And we'll be happy to work with you, your staff, and as well, Mr. Cedillo, work with you and your staff to address your areas of concern.
We're prepared to support funding for.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. I'd like to continue this item for 60 days with the CAO report. That's okay with you, right, Mr. Cedillo? Thank you. So we move that, and with no other business before us, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you for everyone for coming here, and thank you so much for being here.